Okay, hello.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
You can make me host now, Sally, and you can.
Okay, I'll do that. Welcome. Okay.
Okay, so that's all right. This doesn't look like alumni. This looks like current students somehow. Not quite sure.
Some and some.
Cheryl, what should we do? What should we be doing in terms of time?
Let's give a minute for people to.
And is the expectation to be an hour? What's the
I
expectation?
think so.
Okay.
Another minute for people to sign on, and then we start. Start, because there are people who, are on time. And then we'll go from there.
Okay, people just don't have their screens on, I can see. Okay, so first of all, hello everybody. And delight to see you all. I'm going to suggest that people who would like to are welcome to put their screens on so we can see each other. It's always a nice thing, I think. But thank you to Jemima's computer for that and to Layla as well. And to Cheryl for being here. We always are thankful to Cheryl. Okay, so what we're going to do today, first of all, thanks to everybody who's coming, who's here. And second of all, I want to try and explain what we're going to try and do today. We're going to talk a little bit about the 4 children. I think with a group of women, we can't really call them the 4 sons. I know we talk about the Arba Banim, but I don't really see any reason why it needs to be gendered. I'm not sure there's anything particularly male about them. What I discovered a few years ago was a lot of
Hello.
Hasidut.
Yes.
Sorry, 1 minute.
Good, Chris. How are you?
So let's try and see if we can silence people. Let's see. Mute. Okay, we're done. Okay, great. So what I discovered a few years ago was a whole bunch of Hasidic teachings, which, often we look at the Arba Banim and we see the Arba Banim as, one good, the Chacham, and then we've got the Rasha. The Rasha's not very good. And the She'eni Yodeh Lishol doesn't know how to ask. And the Tam, it's not exactly a virtue. And suddenly we have the idea of like one exemplary son and lots of other sons who are, not exactly exemplary. And what you see here is that in Chassidut, a focus on all the four sons as all the four children as positive characters. And that's what I want to try and do with you today. So we'll see how we manage to go. But before I even start getting to the source sheet and getting to, maybe I'll share the source sheet in the chat. Hold on a second. So if anybody wants to, for some reason I see if I can file. Give me just 1 second.
No, because then I said I'll meet them early.
Okay, I just sent it in the chat, so I hope everybody can. 1 second, it's gone. Okay,
You
great.
have the ability to share screen if you want.
Yeah, I know I do.
Oh, okay.
I'm deliberately not sharing screen at the moment. So I'm sending it just to everybody so you have it, but we'll get there in a second. So I want to start off with the very notion before we even start of children and parents and the notion of family. And I think we should realize that, first of all, the book of, and these are things which are Devarim Yeduim, but I'm mentioning things which we maybe all know. Sefer Shemot begins with a nation in slavery. And but what's very significant is what starts off is with the notion of family. Vayelech ish mi beit Levi vayikach et bat Levi, right? And even before that, we have the notion of the miyaldota ivriot, where it's not clear exactly who they are. But if you remember, when they act in order to save the Jewish people, vayas Hashem lahem batim. God makes them batim. It's not clear what those batim are. Rashi says batei malchut, batei kahuna, batei leviah. But what I want to stress is this notion of bayit from the very beginning. The notion of family, the notion of family relationships. So we've got, for example, Vatatatsav achoto merachok, the notion of Moshe's sister. And then later on, she has to call an Isha Mineket, and she finds Em Hayeled. So this notion of parents and children and siblings and bayit is really, really, I think, very, very significant. And it comes up again in Perek Yudbet in the Parsha, which talks about the idea of celebrating Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Leil HaSeder, and there we have the notion of that this has to be celebrated in homes. Okay, so first of all, mishchu k'chulachem tzon mishpachotechem lemishpachotechem, the idea of mishpacha, right? And then, of course, the notion of daubing the blood on the doorpost. Va'atem lo titzu ish mipetach beito ad boker. Apparently, we have to be in a bayit, and later on, the idea being va'avar Hashem lingofet Mitzrayim, v'lo yiten hamashit avol batechem lingof. And this idea of the bayit is stressed time after time in this chapter, the notion of bayit. So the first moments of the development of the Jewish people is the notion of bayit and mishpacha. The celebration is one of bayit and mishpacha. Really, we find it time after time after time. I'll just mention etc. And all the time, the idea of bayit is very much stressed. So the first point I want to say is the idea that Arba Banim, parents and children, hopefully more generations if possible, grandparents, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who knows, the notion of bayit, the notion of family contact and connection is very deep in the idea of Pesach. I'd even argue more than that. That is what enables the Geula, the family connection. But I want to maybe say one thing even further. Maybe I'll put it this way. You all remember one of the first, probably I think it's the first time in Tanakh, the first time in Torah that slavery is mentioned. Can anybody think of where that is? The first time slavery is mentioned? So I think the first time would be mentioned would be the story of Noach getting drunk, right? Noach gets drunk and his children, right, or particular child, we have the notion of Canaan, whose father is Ham, right? And comes and tells him, Noach, grandpa is, naked and drunk in the tent, okay? And there's almost this sense of mockery, to which the other brothers walk backwards and they cover their father's nakedness, etc. When Noach wakes up, what does he say? Aror Canaan, Eved Avadim Yeh Le'echav. Okay, now let's remember, Vayar Cham, the person who sees Noach naked is not Canaan. It's in fact Cham, one of the three brothers. But the person who's cursed is Canaan. What is that about? He says, Aror Canaan should be cursed. Eved Avadim Yeh Le'echav. He's going to be a slave to his brothers, etc., etc. Baruch Hashem Elokei Shem v'Kanan Eved Lamo. So there are two questions here. Number one, why is the punishment for ridiculing Noach slavery? And why is Cham not punished? And instead of Cham being punished, his son is punished. And I can't even remember who gave me this explanation. I heard it so many years ago. I've forgotten who taught it to me. I apologize. I apologize to whoever taught it to me. But it's a very, very beautiful interpretation. And he said like this, Cham, I'll put it differently. What is the essence of slavery? One of the statements in the Gemara is, Eved ein lo chayas. Eved has no relatives. To be a slave is to not have any relatives. When my children were young and they were, they liked it when I'd like walk into the Seder all dressed up and make things very excited for them. I sometimes used to go and dress up and put like an Arab headdress or a funny hat on and wrap a sheet around myself and slip out the back door and come knock on the front door. And I used to say, I'm a slave, running away from my master. Please give me shelter. And then my wife would say, tell us what's it like to be a slave. And I used to tell them a story. And I used to say, I'm a slave. And last year, I had my son's birthday party. And my son said, I knew I had my son's birthday party, but my master needed me at that moment. I couldn't make it for my son's birthday party. And this year, it was my son's birthday party again tonight. And my son said to me, Abba, last year you couldn't make my birthday party because your master needed you. And this year, please promise me that you'll make my birthday party. And the day was getting later and later, and my master kept on telling me he needed me, and he needed me to cook, and he needed me to schlep, and he needed me to do this. And I kept on thinking to myself, I'm going to get in so much trouble with my master, but I can't let my son down. And so I've run away from my master because I need to be there for my child, right? That was the story I always used to tell. What was I trying to say? A slave. Why, when Cham ridiculed his father, did he punish Canaan, Cham's son, and say, you're going to be a slave? Because he was saying, you know what? If that's the relationship you have to your father, when you're old and when you're, chas v'shalom, I don't know, in a wheelchair, when you need somebody to help you walk, you know what? Cham, your son Canaan is not going to be there. You know why? Because he's going to be pushing somebody else's father's wheelchair. Canaan's going to be a slave. And he's not going to be able to help his own father because he's not going to be available for his father. Eved ein lo chayas. And Eved has no relatives. What I'm trying to say here is the idea that to be free is to be there for your family. To be free is to be able to understand the relationship of the generations. And I remember many, many years ago, maybe some of you have seen this, it's a very old series. There's a book by a guy called Alex Haley called Roots. Don't know if anybody's seen it. And it's about, it starts off with maybe studied in school, I don't know. And it's about the slave trade and the whole civil rights movement. And what happens is it's talking about the blacks in America and going through slavery and, all the way to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and whatever it might be. And one of the things that these slaves do when they have a baby, right, is they actually hold it up to the moon and they give their name, like their Jewish name, but he says, my name is Kunta Kinte, right? And whatever he says, right? And there's this idea of, how we giving them their identity from father to son. Some of you who read like the book Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, and you know the story about when the woman gets pregnant, by the way, very much like Hagar, and she knows she's going to have a child, and she runs away. Why? Because she doesn't want her child. It's bad enough she is a slave. She doesn't want her child to be a slave, because to have a child is a slave means he's not your child. To have a child who's a slave means he's really somebody else's child. By the way, that's exactly what the angel tells Hagar. Don't worry, he'll be your son, right? He'll be your son. To do that, by the way, they have to get their freedom. And that's exactly what happens to Hagar. We think it's bad that Hagar and Ishmael get sent away, but in fact, it's the fulfillment of Hagar's wish to get her freedom. Whichever way, what I'm trying to say is, this is all by way of introduction, right? To be free is to be able to tell your story. To be free is to be able to pass your story on to your children. Freedom, family, intergenerational, the notion of having your own house, not being a slave in somebody else's house, not being able to have to attend to somebody else's father or somebody else's children, but being able to attend to your children and your parents and to pass on your story. That is the essence of freedom. And that's what we're going to be doing on the night Leil HaSeder. And therefore, the notion of parents and children, whether it's Manishtana, or whether it's V'Yigaret Levincha, or whether it's Arba Banim, the idea of that intergenerational, to me, is not only the style of telling the story, but it is the essence of telling the story. It's more than the essence of telling the story. It's the essence of being free. It's the ability to tell your own autonomous story on your own basis. Okay? So with that note, that was a rather long and winding introduction. Let's go and try and see a few perspectives. We'll see how far we get into the Arba Banim. And as I said in my introduction, I don't know if everybody was there, but in my introduction, I said that frequently we evaluate the different children, maybe the Chacham's the superior one, and everybody else, it's downwards from there. Well, we'll see that in various Chassidut, where it's seen as very, very different. So let's take a look at what we have here. Okay, so this is the text of the Arba Banim. I'll just maybe focus on the question thing with the help of Rabbi Sachs, and then we'll get to the Chassidut, right? And let's just enjoy it. Always, it's fun to read Rabbi Sachs because he writes things so eloquently. But he says, the Pesach narrative must be constructed in response to and begin with questions by a child. It is the duty of a parent to encourage his or her children to ask questions, and the child who does not yet know how to ask should be taught to ask. There's nothing natural about this. Okay, and that's the significant thing here. To the contrary, it goes dramatically against the grain of history. Most traditional cultures see it as a task of a parent or teacher to instruct, guide, or command. The task of the child is to obey. Children should be seen, not heard, goes the old proverb. Children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to God, says a famous Christian text. Socrates, who spent his life teaching people to ask questions, was condemned by the citizens of Athens for corrupting the young. In Judaism, the opposite is the case. It is a religious duty to teach our children to ask questions. That is how they grow. Judaism is the rarest of phenomena of faith based on asking questions, sometimes deep and difficult ones that seem to shake the very foundations of faith. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, said Avraham. Lama hariot la'amazeh, says Moshe, right? Etc., etc. So questions, again, questions are really at the essence of what's happening here. And so what I've stressed in my introduction, importance of questions, Aravanim, the importance of children, with parents, with a home, with intergenerational, and that's what we're. If anybody, by the way, wants to comment or add anything at any point, feel either put it in the chat or feel free to, unmute yourself and share. Okay, so I want to share with you. I'm going to start off with maybe from a slightly unusual direction. This is not Hasidus at all. This is modern Israeli literature. And this is Natan Alterman. I don't know how many of you have heard of Natan Alterman, but Natan Alterman is very, very famous because he was a poet in the 1940s, one of Israel's premier poets. And he, in fact, had a column in the main, the newspaper Davar, which was the most famous newspaper, the newspaper of the labor movement in Israel. And it was, his column was called Hatorah Shvi'i, the seventh column. You know why? Because it was the seventh column in the newspaper, where they used to have like a big broadsheet, like the New York Times, or the Daily Telegraph in England. They had columns, and this was the seventh column. And this is a poem that he wrote. Did I write the date of when he wrote it? Let's see. Yes, it's from 1951. So 1951, we have a state. State was set up in 1948. The war's end 1949, but the big aliyot are in 1949, 1950. And things are getting a bit tough, right? There's rationing in Israel at that time. The country's pretty poor. There's terrorism, right? You might be surprised. Some of the terrorism coming in from Gaza. Who would ever know that such a thing happened? And Natan Alterman writes for Pesach this poem, okay? And he says like this: Echad tam, there was a simple son, Hamin hazeh afas, kulanu chachamim. Once there was a simple person. This species is extinct. Now, kulanu chachamim. You can see how he's playing with the language of the Seder, right? Ach kanireh haya zeh lo mashal shel stam. Kayom ulai kasher b'kach la'amin, aval haya ei pam echad tam. There once was a simple man. Muzar haya ha'ish. He was a strange man. Kol am yotzei mi Goshen ra'u et ha'otot v'amoftim ba'ayin. All the people who came out from Goshen saw all the signs and wonders. Ra'u et hamakot ve'et nachash ha'nechoshet. Ra'u et ha'arim shenazlu mayim. Right? I assume people understand the Hebrew. You've got the English in case you need it. Barishona hayu omdim nifamim. At the beginning they stood. Nifam means like, whoa. Umiyadam sonchim atzir v'haya'eh. Right? And from their hands, literally, their pot and pan would drop. Aval chishka. But very soon, tafsu, they got it. Zeh teva hayamim, zeh sidran, v'kach na'eh, v'kach ya'eh. Right? Look how he's playing around with kilo na'eh, kilo ya'eh, and also with the ya'eh. You know, a dustpan and brush is a ya'eh, right? So a mataten, a ya'eh. So this is how the world works. It's just normal. Achein me'etzei tamet eretz Ramses. Al Yom She'en Bones. After they came out of Ramses, they were like, whoa, no miracles today. But not this legendary man. You had to see that. A gutz, by the way, is like a dwarf. You had to see this short little tam. That pitchon einav, with his wide open eyes. Who knidham hibit va'od gufo somer, right? He was standing amazed as his body was completely amazed. Rak mazot tu amar. He kept on saying, whoa, what is that? Kitam, mahu omer. Ach etarim rakdu mineged ke'elim. When the hills danced like ke'elim, omrim shu kimat yatsa min ha'kelim. Ushnei sarei meot asher chilku tziyud. And two officers of hundreds who distributed equipment, Sipru, Shu diber afilu tzionut. He even spoke of Zionism. Achen man arich milim mizan elzan, talush haya ish ukmo michutz lazman. What can we say about such a person? He must be outside time. But if he hadn't seen what he'd seen, right? If he hadn't known what he had known, if he hadn't seen what he'd seen, it'd be difficult, even in a fleeting thought, what might have remained from the entire legend. Of course, min ha'agada is min ha'agada. This is Erev Pesach, Yud Daled B'Nisan, 20th of April, 1951, right? Apparently that year was also a leap year. Pesach was very late. And what he's basically saying is, guys, wake up. Don't you realize Medina Israel is a miracle? Everybody's complaining that Medina Israel, this is wrong and this is wrong. Nobody appreciates that every day we're living a miracle. It says, just open your eyes and be amazed. But we've all got so used to the fact that we have Medina Israel. What do? That's not impressive. Why isn't there better food, right? Why hasn't Bezek supplied my telephone? And what he was basically saying is, we are living in a Dor Shel Geula. I thought it was worthwhile. First of all, how is Tam being explained according to this poem? It's being explained with the notion of amazement, of wonder, right? The Tam, Mahu Omer, Mazot, right? What does he say? Wow, right? Mazot, not, what is that? But not with a question mark, but rather with an exclamation mark. Like, look at that, right? That's amazing, right? And in this regard, I just think it's important. We've gone through a very, very difficult winter, very difficult 7 months since Simchat Torah, 6 months, 7 months. And sometimes we feel, especially after the last year in Israel, that things are falling apart a little bit. So first of all, things aren't falling apart, Baruch Hashem, despite what people say in the newspaper or whatever. The army is doing amazing work and the achievements are great. Having said all of that, I think we're all in a state of tension and disarray and concern for the future. These are not easy times. And maybe that's exactly what Natan Alterman was trying to tell people in 1951. Look around you, understand what we have, and understand, Mazot, this is amazing. Sometimes we have to be not such a chacham, but, right, he says, Kulanu chachamim, that's what he says at the beginning. Hamina ze afes, this person's extinct, Kulanu chachamim, right? Nowadays, we're all so wise, but this is not a mashal shel stam. There really was somebody who was echad tam, who could look at the miracles which happened and be amazed. So first of all, I'd just like to start off with that, which I find speaks to me. If it's interesting to hear a voice from the beginning of the state of Israel talking in that way, we should understand that Jews have always complained, and it's never been simple. Okay, so I'm going to move from here to Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, who again is going to be excited by the notion of the Tam. And here's an article from 1964 called "Be Not Overwise." And we're going to talk a little bit in the next two sources. And again, sorry that the sources, this one's in English, but that's the language it was written in. But I managed to bring a Rabbi Nachman in Hebrew, so I hope that's okay for you. So we frequently look at the question that they're going to ask is, who's the opposite of the Chacham and who's the opposite of the Rasha, right? How do you pair them? Sometimes we think that they're, I don't know, it's Chacham and Rasha are opposites, like the good boy and the bad boy. And then a Taman She'enu Yodeh Lishol opposites. Because we always, when there are 4, we always think we can put them into 2 twos. So he says, intellectually, the Chacham and the She'enu Yodeh Lishol are opposite to each other. First is wise, the second is foolish. He doesn't even know how to ask. Then, however, there's the criteria of conduct. Here, Rasha and Tam are counterposed, right? Now that's really interesting. Because Rasha is bad, right? Just 1 minute. I just need to close the door of my study. Just 1 second. Here we go. Here are Shah, Tam, and counterposed. The first is wicked, the second good. The Tam So that's an interesting question. Is tam the opposite of chacham? Chacham sophisticated, tam is simple, right? So he says the tam is not the opposite of the chacham, but of the rasha. The tam is a complementary word, a positive word. It's seen from the fact that Yaakov Avinu was called Ish Tam Yodea Ohalim, right? Yoshev Ohalim. So Yaakov Ish Tam, Yaakov Ish Tam. And that's a Talmud term for an animal that is benevolent or domesticated rather than dangerous, right? You've got Shor Tam and Shor Mu'ad. So if you're somebody who is, domesticated, if you're a tzaddik, right, then you have this idea. So the Tam is not the simple son or the foolish son, but the wholesome son, the pious and good and obedient one. So he says, isn't that fascinating? So he's going to say is, out of the 4 children, you've got the Chacham, who's intellectual. Sheini Odeh Lishol is unintellectual. And that is a category which is to do with intelligence. But then the Rasha and Tam are in fact about piety. The Rasha's evil or not pious, and the Tam is Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. He's whole, he's pure, wholesome, good and obedient. Okay, that's why the Tam is the opposite of the Rasha. He's also very different from the one who can't ask. For while the latter is childish, right? The She'eno Yedeh Lishol is childish. The former, the Tam, is childlike. And that's so nice. That's what he's saying. Okay, so what he's saying is the She'eno Yedeh Lishol is childish, but the Tam is childlike. While the latter is infantile, the Tam is simple. And what a noble virtue simplicity is. It's so lovely. The Chavetz Chaim and the Chazon Ish and others were brilliant scholars, but they exuded simplicity. Right? I don't know if you've ever come across a scholar like this. I remember walking around Shari Chesed. I used to have a friend of mine who his parents used to have an apartment in Shari Chesed, and we used to go to the shul, the Gra in Shari Chesed. You might know Shari Chesed. It's right next to Rehavia, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach used to daven there in the Bet Knesset Agra, and he had this beautiful state, exactly like he says, simplicity about him, almost naivety. Despite all the praise we heap on the wise son, he's not unblemished for some strange reason which may go deep into the unconscious of our race. There's always been an instinctive element of suspicion about the Chacham. Witness the sarcasm. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. But now he goes to Rabbi Nachman, right? The grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And he put it this way. Uvemet, achar kol ha-chochmot, afilu mi sheyodea chochmot be'emet, achar kol ha-chochmot. So even after you know, and even after you're intelligent, and you've got your PhD and everything else, achar kol ha-chochmot, you got smicha, right? Smicha for men, smicha for women, right? Tzarich lachshlich kol ha-chochmot. Okay? Then you need to abandon all of your sophistication, v'la'avod et Hashem bitmimut, and worship God bitmimut, b'pshitut gamor b'lo shum chochmot, with simplicity, without any of the sophistication or without any of the innuendos. V'zeh chochma gdola sheb'chol ha-chochmot, v'li liot chacham klal. Right, so typical Rabbi Nachman. If you know some Rabbi Nachman, right? So he basically what is he saying? You want to really know what it is to be chacham? It's really to be bitmimut, bipshitut, right? He says, and I'm continuing with Rabbi Norman Lamb, not to be wise at all, for in fact there's no completely wise person in the world. For man's wisdom is still naught compared to that of the Creator. Vaikar hu ki rachmana libabai, above all. Right, the merciful God desires man's heart, not assuredly in the American Jew's sense of a good heart, excusing one from living like a Jew. Right, what he means by, I'm a good person, so I don't need to, but in a sense of emotional and spiritual deepening of experience and practice of mitzvot. Hasidism is unimpressed by intellectual acrobatics. It prefers heart over mind, faith over philosophy, dedication over dialectics, love over learning. The third sum, the Tam, that should say, sorry, I scanned it in, is thus regarded as even greater than the first, the Chacham. And now, right, so first of all, this is fascinating, right? He's saying that Chasidut, right? Isn't that a fascinating sentence, right? Hasidism is unimpressed by intellectual acrobatics. It prefers heart over mind, faith over philosophy, dedication over dialectics, love over learning. And in that regard, the hero is not the chacham, the intellectual, but the tam. La'ovdecha be'emet, rachmana libabai. God wants your heart. And he says, can such a point of view be accepted today? I believe so. Our society in general suffers from an overabundance of knowledge at the expense of man's wholeness, his self, his integrity. Science reigns supreme, and colleges are impossibly crowded. Knowledge is universally acknowledged as the key to a better job and a more convenient society, as power in the world of international relations. All of this is unquestionably true, yet when the mind its achievements are so stressed that all else is excluded, then man is considered a machine who loves and hates and fears and passions, aspirations are trivial, then we've outsmarted ourselves. The man is in eclipse. He's like a freak child who has an abnormally large head and an undersized body and heart, right? It's an interesting metaphor, right? By the way, I think some of this is true. I think since he wrote this in 1964, thank God, society's woken up a lot to this, right? The whole notion of mindfulness, the whole notion of people having a life-work balance, right? I think has realized that, not everything's about intellectual achievements and not everything's about, all these things. Having said all of that, he finishes and says, it's not enough to emphasize the chacham alone, for while it's true that wisdom is indispensable both to general life and Jewish living, it's equally true that beyond all the complexities and subtleties that tantalize man's mind and confound his understanding, there stands the simple and sublime truth of the one God, author of all. What we need is the Tam, who can include wisdom in his personality and transcend it. That's what Rabbi Nachman was saying. Who can possess scholarship without displaying pretentiousness, who can develop his intellect and yet, in the moment he turns to his God, abandon his self-consciousness and serve his maker with wonder and simplicity, with love and faith. Okay, so I think that's a fantastic teaching. Let me just say a word about Rabbi Norman Lamb, Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb. He was, of course, the rabbi, well, I don't know if not, of course, maybe some of you know, he was the rabbi of the Jewish Center in the Upper West Side. He was the president of Yeshiva University. And what's amazing is, on the one hand, he was an incredible lamdan, and he had, knew the Rav's Torah inside and out. But when you read his writings, he was a master of Chassidut. It's like the master of philosophy, but also of Chassidut, and particularly Rav Kook. And you sort of wonder how this man, in the 1940s and 1950s, was clearly reading Rav Kook, incredibly well versed in Chassidut, where he had all the time to absorb all that material, write books on Chassidut, and have all those achievements. I have no clue, but I find it quite fascinating. Okay, we're going to try and get to another couple of teachings on this. As I said, my aim today is dafka not to look at the chacham, but to dafka look at the other children and to look at them in a virtuous, we're not going to be condemning anyone tonight. We're going to be trying to show how dafka, each of the sons have virtues. So he says like this. This is Rav Meidan. Some of you will know Rav Meidan, Rosh Hashiva and Gush. In many of the illustrations found in traditional Gadot, the four sons are divided into two groups: the wise versus the wicked, the simple versus the son who doesn't know how to ask. Right? We've already said that. The wise son and the wicked son are perceived as opposites because we identify the wise son with a righteous one and the true opposite of the wicked son. So what we've really said is, wise doesn't mean wise. Wise means religious. And then wicked is a sinner. That's how we do it. The simple son is portrayed as stupid, and the son does not know to ask is depicted even stupider than the simple son. But what's the meaning of this division? So he says, I don't understand. I understand that wise is the opposite of wicked, right? Sorry, tzaddik is the opposite of wicked, but simple, stupid and stupider don't work, right? You understand what I'm saying? It doesn't work. So he says something interesting. He says, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, the third son is not the Tam, but rather the Tipesh. Rav Chia taught the Torah speaks of four sons: a wise, a wicked, a stupid son, and a son who does not know how to ask. Not a Tam, but a Tipesh. So he says, okay, so he basically does exactly what, so he does it this way, okay? He says, therefore, we've got The opposite of the chacham is the tam. That's how he wants to understand it. And then you've got the wicked and the she'eino yodeh lishon. Okay. All right, so now let's turn to understand what's happened. Why does the wicked son specifically ask about the Korban Pesach? Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem, right? And if you look in Sefer Shemot, it's about the Korban Pesach. And he says like this: it was seen the objective of the Pesach land is not just to remember the exodus from Egypt. The Mechilta raises the possibility that a Gentile who converts to Judaism must offer a Korban Pesach when he becomes obligated in mitzvot. In other words, what's he saying, right? That the idea that the Korban Pesach is almost like your membership card of the Jewish people. A Paschal lamb was brought by the people who returned to Zion from exile in Babylonia, and a new covenant was made with God. In the book of Chronicles, you have the Korban Pesach brought by Chizkiyahu, when he did tshuva and removed the idols and altars of his father Achaz. Likewise, King Yoshiyahu brought a Korban Pesach. In other words, always Korban Pesach is about tshuva. It's about belonging. It's about coming back to God. That's what it is. That's what he says here. From all these sources, it seems that a Pesach is not just a commemorative festival. The Paschal offering gives expression to a new covenant made between God and his people. The wicked son question does not stem from a lack of knowledge about ancient history. His question is a challenge to the current covenant with God in his generation, right? In other words, when he says, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem, he's saying, right, why do I need to be Jewish? Right? So let's take a look how he says. And now we're going to talk about the she'eino yodeh lishol. What did he say before? He said, Chacham is the opposite of tam. Chacham is tam. Right? Those are the two opposites. They're distinct because tam is really tipesh, right? So who's the opposite of the rasha? The she'eino yodeh lishol. Why is the rasha the opposite? Why is the she'eino yodeh lishol the opposite of the rasha? Do you understand the question? Yeah. So now he's going to define who is she'eino yodeh lishol. He says the fourth son who does not know how to ask is ordinarily perceived as a child, right? Who does not understand, one we relate to with forgiveness and compassion. However, the principle we put forward regarding the pairs of opposites, which set the son who does not know how to ask against the wicked son, brings us to re-evaluation of the nature of this son. I remind you of the story of the father who wanted to give the Torah to his children. He offered the Torah to his first three sons. You remember what he's talking about, right? That God went around to give the Torah, and he offered the Torah to the Ishmaelim, and they said, "What's in it?" And he offered to Edom, and they said, "What's in it?" Right? So he said he offered the Torah to his first three sons. And they all asked what's written in it, and found some issue that did not accord with their character. But he offered the Torah to his fourth son, Am Yisrael, and he asked nothing, and immediately said, "Naaseh v'nishma." This son was the people of Israel, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Refraining from asking questions need not be interpreted as stupidity. It can be also understood as innocent belief and readiness. The fourth son is the righteous believer. So I want you to understand what Rav Meidan's done. We started off in this class talking about the tam, and if you want, we had this notion with the tam said Altaman. The tam is wonder. Said Rabbi Norman Lamb and Rabbi Nachman, tam means simplicity, like of the Chabe Emet. It means a big heart, not just a big brain. Okay, so that's how they understood it. Rav Meidan is doing something else. He says, Chacham and tam is an intellectual vector, but Rasha, what's Rasha? Rasha is the refusal to be part of the Jewish people, to refusal to be in a reconnection with God. That's the Rasha. In which case, what's the she'eino yodeh lishol? It's Naaseh v'nishma. It means I'm willing to be Jewish without any questions, right? It is the righteous believer. So here is a new way of recasting the she'eino yodeh lishol. As he says, it's not to be interpreted as stupidity. That's the tam, but it is actually the righteous believer. It's the idea that I don't ask questions, I don't try and reject, right? But I'm going to see if I can just accept Naaseh v'nishma. I just find it fascinating that, you know, people are looking at all of these sons. I mean, it's very, very famous that, you know, all the 4 sons are around the table, right? All the 4 children around the table. And that already is a virtue, right? But what all of these sources are trying to do is to dig even deeper into their virtues and to try and say, well, each one has a strength. So let's now turn, if we've spoken about Tam and She'enu de Lishol, let's talk about the Rasha. And who can we hear about the Rasha better than the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Okay. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, let's make this a bit smaller, has a beautiful reading. Here we go. So, Hagamara Omeret she'afal pi shechata Yisraelhu, right? Very famous line. Yisrael afal pi shechata Yisraelhu. It doesn't matter how, once you're a Jew, even if you sin, you're still a part of Am Yisrael. B'chol matzav sheyudi lo yeh kayemet b'tocho nekudat hayadut. Whatever a Jew is in, whatever situation he is, there is a spark of a Jew, right? By the way, of course, this is exactly how Chabad functions. They find all the lost Jews from wherever they are. That's why they're, in the most far-flung places, because they really do believe that there's a spark of a Jew. And if a spark of a Jew, why do they stand in, Fifth Avenue or wherever it might be and offer people to put on tefillin? Because they really believe that however wayward a Jew is, if they come into contact with Shem Hashem, with tefillin, or whatever it might be, a mitzvah, then their neshama will flare up. So this is this idea of nekudat hayadut. Therefore, my father-in-law, Admor HaKodem, the previous Rebbe, said, Et hamilim, echad chacham ve'echad rasha. What do we say? Al arba banim dibra Torah, echad chacham ve'echad rasha. And what does he say? Echad chacham ve'echad rasha, b'kol echad yesh et nekudat echad. What's echad? Hashem echad, right? Echad chacham. There's an echad in the chacham, but there's also an echad in the rasha, right? For some of you pshat people, this is going to be a bridge too far, but we'll accept that we're learning Chassidut. Please excuse my, the drush here is thick. But it's covered. You remember what we say to the Rasha? We say smash his teeth in, and we say or maybe blunt his teeth, right? Rabbi Riskin used to say that if he comes with a negative attitude, then you need to blunt his teeth. You need to find a way to calm him down. He's so sharp, right? You need to blunt him. So he says, what was it? Ilu hayasham, if he was there, lo hayanigal. So he says, Eina kavana l'rachek oto chas v'shalom. We're not trying to push away the Rasha. Lehefech, lomar lo ki rak sham b'mitzrayim hu lo hayanigal. Right? The reason is because you're in Mitzrayim. But if you come to a Shabbaton, if you come to Shul, if you learn a little bit of Torah, you know why you're acting like a Rashi in the wrong place. If you come to a Fabrengen, if you come and sing a little bit, dance a little bit, do a few mitzvahs, right? Right? So if you stay in Egypt, of course you won't be with you, but you're not staying in Egypt, you're coming to Har Sinai, right? And in another Fabrengen, this is from a Hitva'adut, right, of the Rebbe, on Pesach, he started talking about the Eino Yodeh Lishol. And he says, what is the idea that the She'eino Yodeh Lishol, Ben She'eino Sho'el, Eino Ochez B'diburim Al Yitziat Mitzrayim Sheba Milmayla, Hotzienu Hashem Mitzrayim. He taught, okay, so says there are some people who can't appreciate miracles, a redemption from above. What is that? God took us out of Egypt, doesn't speak to them. It taught Adam Tzarich Letzeit Mitzrayim. In other words, some people relate to the fact that God took us out of Egypt, but some people relate to the fact that you must take yourself out of Egypt. What does that mean? You need to open new avenues to Yetziat Mitzrayim. You You need to talk about the way that Egypt represents a person leaving their hagbalot, right? Their limitations. Al kocha shel emunah meromer el hagbalot hasechel, v'zeh yavil lemrirut shel matzavo she'eino kafi hara'oi. What's the Rebbe talking about? To cut a long story short, the Rebbe's talking about psychology. He says that some people can't relate to the Exodus story because for them, they're only relating to the miraculous aspect of it. They can't understand that God took us out of Egypt. So what do you have to do? Apatachlo. What does it mean? Open a door. Open another angle. Some people are not willing to ask because they think that the frame of the discussion demands that it's given a certain way. Many years ago, I had a friend of mine who was leading a Seder for a very intellectual crowd, but a crowd who were totally not learned in Jewish sources. And he actually consulted with me, what he should do in order to engage them. In the end, I asked him what he did. And he said to me, he surfed the internet and he found speeches of different anti-Semites throughout history, right? From, whether it'll be Rav Shakeh in Sefer Malachim, to Antiochus in the Book of the Maccabees, to all these different speeches of church fathers, and from stories of the Inquisition to Hitler to whoever it might be. All speeches. And he puts a copy of each one, a different speech, on everybody's plate at the beginning of the Seder. And before they made Kiddush or after they made Kiddush, each person went round and they read their speech about how the Jews are terrible, or how the Jews are not going to survive. And then he posed the question, even before they got to Manishtana, right? How are we here? That's what the Rebbe's saying. Some people, they can't look at a miracle. They're just not in the conversation. So what do we have to do, that person? We have to apatachlo. You need to open a way to find him a way of leaving Egypt, to leave his limitations, right? Maybe not the parafaith in the divine, right? Above all human intelligence, but a way that maybe, and here, what does he talk about? He says the notion of a person leaving their limitations or whatever it might be, right? And he says like this here. 1 second. All right. Minhag imahot haksherot b'Yisrael is the practice of our good women in Israel. Shebimkom lesaper leyeladim sipurim v'chadashot me'itonim uchyotze bazeh. The good Jewish women, instead of reading the newspaper or all sorts of fairy tales, what do? Mesaprim lahem sipurei Torah. They teach them Torah stories, Bible stories. Gam inyanim shelo lamdu b'cheder, mitoch chiyut v'ilavut, with a sense of enthusiasm. Ad shar davar na'aseh kmo chai. V'al b'zeh ha'yeladim mekablim chinuch amiti sheyifal v'yashpia kol chayehem. And he says, ואפשר כי כבר דיברנו מזה שבאותו הפסוק שרמזה התורה תשובה לבן הרשע, רמזה תשובה לשאינו יודע לשאול. He says, isn't it interesting? The same pasuk we do, בעבור זה עשה השם לי ליצאתי מישראל, is the same answer to the Rasha and the same answer to the שאינו יודע לשאול. He says, why is it? So he's, sorry, 1 minute. I'm making a mistake. All right. No, I'm mixing things up. Sorry. I have no clue. All right, let's leave it there. Okay. Eish Kodesh. I want to deal with the Eish Kodesh. I didn't realize this was a different keta. So we're going to finish with this. We've only got a couple of minutes, and I'll leave you to read the Sfat Emet on your own. But let's read the Eish Kodesh. You all know who the Eish Kodesh is? Eish Kodesh, the Rebbe Mipiazetzna, right? The Chovat Talmidim. The Eish Kodesh is very famous because he was a Hasidic Rebbe. There's a very famous Karlbach story about the Holy Hunchback, if you ever heard that story, who learnt with the Eish Kodesh. He was an expert educator who wrote about developmental psychology in the shtetl, and he was taken with so many tens of thousands of Jews to the Warsaw Ghetto, and there he preached during the years from 1940, 41, 42, until the dissolution. He was actually killed in the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, which took place over Pesach in 1943. So he asks and with this we'll finish. He says, so he says exactly what I was saying before. How can it be that the same answer is given to the She'enu Yodea Lishal as is given to the Ben Arasha? And he says, Pashut efshar lomar shebemet ein kavanat haTorah shenarchik afilu et Ben Arasha. Judaism isn't interested. The Torah is not interested even in pushing away the Rasha. But he says, Rak kivan sheshnehem heim bechinat she'enu yodea lishol. Liftoach biktusha. He says both the she'enu yodea lishol and the Rasha, they don't know how to ask. Zeh she'enu yodea lishol legamrei lishol. The she'enu yodea doesn't know how to ask at all. But HaRasha yodea idiot lo tovot. But the Rasha comes with negative attitudes. He has idiot lo tovot. He has a bad starting point. He's learned things about Judaism that have turned him off. Bet hatovot eino yodea lishol. Says Judaism, some people come to the Seder, they come to Judaism with a very negative attitude. They've studied things which have distanced them from Judaism. And he says, therefore, we shouldn't look at the Rasha as a Rasha. We should look at the Rasha as somebody who hasn't had the opportunity to hear the right Judaism. The Torah responds with the same pasuk. Idea is to bring them. He refuses. The Piazetzner Rebbe refuses to distance the Rasha. The person doesn't know how to ask. You tell him the story. But with the Rasha, you have to open him up. What does he say? What do you have to do? You have to somehow wear him down. You have to change his attitude. You have to get past the negativity. Now that's a true work of education, right? But what he says is, if you can haket shinav, if you can take away his sharp teeth, then what will you be left with? A regular she'eno yodea lishol. You'll be left with somebody who just doesn't know how to ask, but not somebody with an attitude. Okay, so that's sort of where we're going to leave it for today. What we've tried to do in some way is to redeem each of the four sons or the four children. I'll just finish by mentioning the Sfat Emet here says that the four sons refers to the four languages of redemption because we need to be redeemed from all four exiles. I'll simply mention, maybe some of you have seen a famous book about love languages, right? It talks about 5 love languages. Some people need touch, some people need speech, some people need company, right? What almost the Sfat Emet is saying is that all of the banim are all ways out of redemption. There's a way out of redemption through the chacham. There's a way of redemption through the tam. There's a way through the she'enu yodea lishol, and even through the rasha. They are 4 languages of redemption. They're 4, not love languages, but freedom languages. They're 4 emancipation languages. And we have to learn to speak all 4 languages. And I guess a little bit of what I've been doing is trying to explain some of that. So that's it for today. Wish you all a chag kasher v'sameach. Thank you all for participating. And have a wonderful Seder with lots of insights. Have a question? Can't hear you. Now I can.
Yeah, sort of like a question and a comment. Okay, so first of all, great shiur, loved it. I like that, all the different perspectives. So specifically for like the Russia, I see, like, if we're going back to what you said earlier about like what Rabbi Sachs said about how like questioning is like the essential, like that's what kind of separates Judaism from a lot of different religions. I feel like the fact that the Russia is coming in even to question, and even if it's in like a disrespectful way or he's trying to be cheeky or whatever, like there's so much value in just that. And I feel like that is kind of what the Lubavitcher Rebbe touched on. But like, I was wondering if you think, given like the position that the She'eno Yodeh Lishol is like Na'aseh V'nishma type idea, would it be better to be someone who like is like Na'aseh V'nishma She'eno Yodeh Lishol and like just accept stuff, or is it better to actually come from like a Rasha's point of view, where at least you're like asking something and making, you know, like looking at the whole situation, and yeah.
Right. So first of all, I don't think. First of all, I love the image that I said at the end of the love languages. Right. Different people need different things, either because of where they are in life, they can't be any other way, or because of their personality. So, and by the way, I think what Rabbi Norman Lamb was saying is maybe there's a time to put on our very intellectual heads, and there's a time to deal with things more emotionally. First of all, there's that. But you know, different people are going to come. If this is a metaphor for Judaism, some people are going to come from a very accepting perspective, and maybe there are things which we are very accepting of. But there are other things which we really find difficult to swallow. You know, maybe about certain things, I'm the rejectionist. I'm like, I can't accept that bit of Judaism. That's just abhorrent to me, right? And other bits, I'm like, oh, you know, even if I wasn't Jewish, I'd love to keep on doing that, right? So maybe within us is a little bit of the, you know, the Rasha, the rejectionism, a little bit of the wonder, a little bit of the blind acceptance. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure, you know, I guess we can cultivate certain demeanors, right? And I'm sure there are times it's really important to challenge. And I think it's very important to be honest with oneself. So it doesn't help anyone when we're having a hard time with Judaism and we act all pious. At some point, it's not going to work. And in that regard, the Rasha is very honest, right? And I love all of those teachings which say we've got to find a way in. There has to be a way, right? There has to be a way. But you know, I really do think that these are different. If you can view all of them from a positive perspective, these are 4 different redemptions, 4 ways forward, and 4 redemption languages. So that's what I like.
Thank you. Really appreciate your answer.
Yafi. Toda. Chag kasher v'sameach. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Rav Alex.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.
Chag Sameach.